Hey, I'm Jeff, your research nerd. I have more than 20 years of experience doing research for companies, trade associations, and campaigns. On this channel, we talk about how to find information that's useful for your business, your education, or your daily life. Please like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps me grow this channel and helps other smart people like yourself find this information. Today, we're going to talk about how to do research on the history of your house. I love history, and I think this is a really interesting way to make history kind of personal. And you can find out who lived in your house before you. Maybe there was some sort of local figure, note of or something like that. And it's interesting to me just to know, who lived in your house before you did, who was walking around in your house before you ever got there. And this isn't just for people who own a house. You could be renting a property and do the same kind of research just based on your address. One of the best places to start is with local property records. Typically, these are held by your county, or I guess if you're in Louisiana, your parish, or in Alaska, a borough. If you live in Virginia, there are cities in Virginia that are not within counties. They're independent of counties, so your city would have these kind of records. And you have something called an assessor, which is the person who takes care of or collects the property taxes in your area. So they have records related to sales and payments of property taxes. Also, usually have a recorder, a county recorder. They might just be called the county recorder. They might be called the recorder of deeds, but they record the deeds, the paperwork involved in the transaction of the sale of a property. They also record the mortgages on properties and things like that, liens and all that kind of stuff. So usually, and I'll say I usually will show you the screen on my computer while I'm working on these things, but first of all, I didn't want to use my address, and secondly, I didn't want to use someone else's address. And just I thought about picking some random address, but I didn't want to do that either because I don't want to expose this kind of information in the video. This is just something you can do on your own, and I think even without the screen, you can still figure this out from my description. So usually on an assessor's website or a recorder's website, you can search by address. You may also be able to search by name. It depends on the jurisdiction, the way things are set up. Also, properties usually have some kind of identification number associated with them, like a particular property has some kind of serial number that your local government uses, or I used to live in Washington, D.C., so they have a square and lot system where each property is assigned to a square and a lot, and that number together is sort of functions like a serial number. Because I mentioned that because and now most counties have lots of property records going back quite a ways online, and so you could search for your own property. You could find this number, this reference number, and usually you can search by that number and pull up everything related to that property going back, as long as they have records. So previous owners, the recording of deeds, or the sales transactions for a property, and you can take that back as far back as you as they have online, and get some sense of who lived there. And also, you might see when your house was built. I mean, if you bought a house, you probably saw this information in all the paperwork involved with the sale, but maybe you don't remember when it was built, or that was just something you kind of glossed over. I live in a pretty old house, so it's interesting to me to know exactly how old it is when it was built. Also, one other interesting thing to look at are Plat Maps, or they might be called parcel maps. That can also have some more historical information, like what the name of the subdivision or the development was when your property was built, again with the year of construction and that sort of information. You may be able to go back to older plat maps, which are usually in a county courthouse. So with the pandemic, you may have limited access to your area courthouse, although now they may be more open. So online, these county agencies like the assessor or the recorder have these maps digitized, but they may also have older versions in big binders or something like that, that you could go back and look in way back and see what, maybe the area that your subdivision is in used to be a farm or something like that, and you could find that information there. The folks in the office there should be able to guide you on what older maps they have and how to look up your property. Also, you might just search online for old maps you might just Google the name of your city or the name of your county for old maps. There's all kinds of maps floating around online now that have been scanned. There's a lot of old maps in the Library of Congress. You might search the Library of Congress website, loc.gov. I've also found maps on archive.org, the Internet Wayback Machine. They've somehow have built up a collection of old maps like that. So you can just, again, search for the name of your area and come up with some old maps like that. Another interesting set of maps to look at are Sanborn Fire Insurance Maps, SANBORN. This was a company that created maps for insurance purposes, I think starting back in the 1800s, and they were in publication. They kept publishing them up till the early 60s, and then after that they were less frequent. Seen a lot of these at the on the Library of Congress website, but they have this interesting system of notations where you could see, sometimes you could look at an older property and there's a structure on this map that isn't there anymore. There's all kinds of little notations about things like where they had water buckets or sand buckets, because these were for fire insurance purposes. There's a lot of interesting historical information, especially when you look at these over time. Look at like them in 1910, 1920, 1930. You can see how things developed over time. They're very interesting to look at. Another interesting place to look for information on your property is the census. So after 70 years, the Census Bureau releases the complete census records from that census a long time ago. They have these big ledgers of all the records that they took during the census. So, we know when the census comes out every 10 years, they release a lot of data that shows this area grew or this area shrunk or the demographics of an area. But this is all of the information, all the granular down to the street level information from the census. So it'll list the names of the people who live there, how many people were in a house, what their occupations were, things like that. I looked up my house in the 1950 census, and there was a family there, a multi-generational family living there. It says one of the things was how many hours did the person work the week before the census taker interviewed them, and it has their occupations and their ages and everything. It's really interesting information. So you can go back to, if you just Google for the census archive, you can go back to the 1940 census, 30 census, 20 census, 1910. I mean, it goes way, way, way back, and so you could trace, who lived in your house or area over time there. Another good place to look is at your county library, or maybe you have a local historical society. They may have maps, historical maps, with this kind of information that we've talked about. Again, I used to live in Washington, D.C., and the D.C. library had all kinds of old maps that were totally fascinating to me. And your local library, or like I said, the local historical society might have something like that. You might also have a state library in your state capital that has all kinds of archival information like this. Just Google around or call around and you'll probably find some old maps that way too. Yet another interesting data point to look for is a reverse directory. So if you are of a certain age and you remember the phone book, which I don't think a lot of people have anymore, I wouldn't even know where to find a phone book right now. But there were companies that published what were called reverse directories, where it was like a phone book, but you could look it up by address instead. So you could look up your address this way. And when I lived in DC, I found a reverse directory, and I looked up the house I was living in, and it had, much like the census, it had names, it had occupations, what type of job they did, where they worked. Really interesting information. And there likely is some kind of reverse directory from back when they used to publish these things. I think I haven't seen these much since past the 60s. There may have been one in your area, but past then. But usually you can find some kind of reverse directory that goes from maybe the 1800s up into the mid 1900s. So once you've gathered all this information, about names and things like that, a good resource to look at is Newspaperscom. This is an archive of old newspapers that have been scanned and are text searchable. It is a subscription-based service, but you might have a library, or maybe there's a university library you have access to, or a local library, or again, a state library in your state. They may have a subscription to this service. But you can go in there, you can just type in your address. You can narrow the search geographically, so maybe you can narrow it to your city, and you could type in the address and see what kind of, there might be something from the police blotter, or some kind of social event or something happen nearby, whatever it might be, or any names of people that you found in your research. Type in their names and see what comes up. You never know where that might lead to. Another thing to look at is books published by a company called Arcadia Publishing. You may have seen these books in gift shops or something like that, but they're these books, they usually have a collection of pictures and some histories of local areas. So, whatever town you can think of, especially towns of a certain size, or even just a region of a state, they have all kinds of books. And you may find one of these books for your area, and it may have some information about your neighborhood or something like that. Here where I live, they have published some for very, very specific neighborhoods, and which is really interesting to me because it seems like a very narrow topic, but they have a really extensive collection of books, and they include really interesting pictures and, like I said, the histories and things like that. So I'll look for them. If you don't, you may see these books, like I said, in a gift shop, but you can also just go online and search through their catalog and find something maybe for your area. So these are all the different ways you can do research on the history of your house. I find this topic completely fascinating, and I hope you do too. I suppose if you didn't, you wouldn't be here. But good luck in your research, and please leave any comments or questions. If you need any help digging something up, I'd love to help you do this. I think it's a lot of fun to do this kind of research and sort of know who was walking around in your house before you were. Thanks, and I'll see you again soon.